practices are starting with the refuge prayer, right? And sometimes after the refuge prayer, we have the bodhicitta prayer. And people were asking me why Lama Lina doesn't do that, why she always goes to the lineage prayer. And it's very important to know that when you are practicing Tantra, and it's also true for the Dzogchen group or the Mahamudra group, there is no differentiation between the subject who you are and the object who is let's say, the three jewels, which are the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, which we are giving some kind of courtesy in when we do the refuge prayer, and arousing the bodhicitta. Because, as you know, the three jewels are in the Sutrayana, they are in the three times, which is past, present, and future. But when you go to the Tantra, and especially to Dzogchen and Mahamudra, so you are in the fourth time. We're trying to be in the fourth time, okay? And in the fourth time, there is no difference between past Buddha, present Buddha, and future Buddha, because we are all in a process. So, for example, with whom am I talking now? Most probably, I'm talking with Buddhas, because it doesn't matter if you have reached Buddhahood, so you're now a full Buddha, or you're in a process, and it will take you 2 minutes from now to be a Buddha, or it will take you to eons, or maybe 60 eons. So we are Buddhas in a process. So that's why that's the perspective that we look at things from the fourth time. So actually the lineage prayer, to whom are we praying? To whom are we giving this respectful prostration? Because the lineage prayer is a prostration, okay? Chakselo, that we sing there, every line that we have Chakselo, it's actually I bow to this person, and I bow to this Buddha, and to this Buddha, and to this Lama, and to this Guru. So to whom, and to this lineage, by the way, because we are mainly bowing to the lineage. So to whom am I bowing? So if we are at the fourth time, so we are bowing actually to all the lineage that became Buddha, and we are also bowing to ourselves, because who we are now, we are in a Buddha, in a process, right? So it's very interesting to have this distinguished understanding about how Tantra and Dzogchen are working, because it's not linear. There is no definitive time like past, present, and future. It's something else. So I hope that you will be able to join me in this specific prayer that Lama Lina is always starting with. And if you don't know it, maybe I'll share it with you in the words in the next time in the mail that we'll send you. But just be aware that when you do the lineage prayer, it's not just words. It's the refuge, it's the bodhicitta, it's all the Buddhas that have been, and all the Buddha that are, and all the Buddha that will be, which is also you, right? And one might be concerned about, if I think I'm a Buddha, so I might get into pride or something, which is, as a Westerners, we were taught not to feel pride, but in Tantra, there is a distinguished pride, which is the very specific pride. I guess that we will talk about it in the future, but this is not a regular pride. This is the tantric pride, from whom you are and why you are this deity, this archetype, this future Buddha or current Buddha. I don't know who you are. I guess you're all Buddhas, right? But let's start with the lineage prayer and we'll see how we go there. Just pay attention to this prayer inside your heart. Bring all the lineage together. You can bring them to your scalp and then see how they get into your heart. They're here in your heart. Or you can see them in front of you. It's up to you. It's up to your capacity of how do you vision things. Chöku'i kuntu zanga gamboi, dorje sembagerab dorje down. Shere singi badu shing labde, dedang machung tata susung chi. Zokchen chupelamala sowa. Ogen pema junela sowa. Doje chang chetiro narodang, mapa milagum potsapa, na pupadang palden trupaso, kagyulama namla sowa, ade. Geluk nama namla sowa, ade. Kagyu nama namla sowa, ade. Lama lina nama namla sowa, ade. Pakan du jong dang yerme pa, gong yerab doje shing trak pa, jite dang ni sume pa, pa lama nom cheten, So we started with the history or the origins of Tantra. And we just realized, if you remember from our last class, that actually people are thinking that the Buddhism has started in Tibet, but we found out that it started way, way back before the Buddha even arose as a Buddha in 500 before CE. So we know now that Buddhism was there in India. It started in India. And then with the Muslim invasion, it was brought up to other places in Asia. We know that according to the capacity of people in different places in Asia, the Buddhism has been spread differently. We spoke about the 18 classes or the 18 schools, which is sometimes called the Hinayana. Sometimes it's called the short, what's it called? I think it's short vehicle, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, it's the vehicle that people who are practicing that, their main focus is on how they will arrive to Buddhahood or to what they called freedom or liberation. And their main focus is themselves and the practice they are doing. So this is mainly the small yana or the short yana. Then we have the Mahayana, which was spreaded in other places in Asia. And Mahayana was not only focusing on myself with regard to how would I go to this liberation, but also put an emphasis on how people will be benefit from the fact that I will be liberated, but I also want to liberate them. And then there was let's say, the esoteric part, which is more archived than we know. The esoteric part was mainly went through Tibet. And Tibet was, I think, the best environment to receive this esoteric, which is the Tantrayana. I don't know how much you know about the culture of Tibet, but before Buddhism came to Tibet, it was in the 6th or 7th century. So Bon was a main religion there. So if you go to study about the culture of bones, so you know that those esoteric practices and ceremonies and a lot of elaborated ceremonies that has to do with the culture was placed with the bones. So when the Vajrayana came to Tibet, it wasn't something that people have been repelled because it was part of their culture, already part of their culture. And I remember once I read the story. I couldn't find the book because I wanted to give you some reference to that. The book was called The White Lama. And I remember this book very clearly because what it showed is that there were a lot of times that Tibet was closed and you couldn't, as a Westerner, you couldn't get there. So this white Lama, he is white because he was a Westerner, he was sneaking into Tibet. And in this book, they describe all the issues that were there when the Vajrayana was part of the culture. Nobody was hitting that because it was their culture. It wasn't secret because people were hiding it. It was secret to those who were outside of Tibet. Tibet was closed before the invasion of the Chinese people that started actually in 49, between 49 and 59, 1949 and 1959, the invasion of the Chinese were already in place. In 59, they took over, okay? That was, the full revolution, that full taking over the Chinese of Tibet. But in between those 10 years, 49 to 59, the invasion started. But before that, Tibet was closed. Rarely people could get in and receive this teaching, especially not from the West. So what happened then? Lamas, gurus, nuns, monks, those who were able were fleeing from Tibet. They were fleeing from Tibet, especially to India, but also to other places in Asia. And all of a sudden, this closed culture and practices were open. And they started to teach. And we had this, sometimes when we speak about karma, we are thinking to ourselves, what is that? A few 100,000, maybe million people were practicing the Vajrayana in Tibet. Not all of them. That was the population. All of them did not practice that. But what happened when the invasion of the Chinese came up? All of a sudden, there are millions of people around the world who are practicing Buddhism. It wasn't before the invasion of the Chinese. So sometimes you hear the Dalai Lama saying that he's not so sure if you look at it from losing the country, which is the land, but not losing the culture and not losing the practices, which is the basic Buddhism. So how one should look at that? Is it a bad thing or a good thing? What do you think? So actually in 59 until 65, I think there were a lot of people who were fleeing from lamas and gurus and practitioners that were fleeing from Tibet to the West. West, let's call India West. I mean, I'm not sure that India was West, but then it started to open up. And what happens then is that now we know people, let's say they are around 75 years old. When you look at them, those were the first students of those lamas that came out from Tibet. So you look at those and they didn't know English, so they had to study and to learn Tibetan. And Lama Lina always speaks about that when she came to Nepal, so she met Lama Yeshe, he was her first teacher, Lama Yeshe, and then Lama Zopa was one of his students. They were her first teachers, but she didn't understand half of what they were saying because their English were very poor. And then when she had her dream and she came up to Tsopema and she went to the cave and she met Wangdo Rinpoche, that was one of the lamas that escaped from Tibet, he was the one that actually opened her heart, or what she calls her root teacher, and also root and heart teacher. But he didn't know even one word in English. And she didn't know one word in Tibetan. So she stayed there, studied Tibetan. He gave her the cave. And actually, those were the days that people from the West who came close to the teachings with Tibetan lamas and Tibetan gurus and all those practitioners, nuns or monks, they had to study Tibetan. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to receive the teachings. So now we have amazing teacher around the world in the same age, by the way. It can be Lama Lina. It can be Lama Glen Muling. I'm talking about my teachers. I'm sure there are much more than that, okay? But I'm talking about my own teachers. Okay. I don't want to open it up because what happened is that when they started to study Tibetan and receive the teachings, it wasn't just, coming like we do. We come, we receive the teaching, we go back home, and then something happened to our life, and maybe we got married, we gave a birth, and we start work, we had to make a living or something. They stayed with the teachers, mainly in India, but some of them were also in other places in Asia. And then what happened? They started to come to the West and teach students. Their teachers encouraged them to teach students because they had the language, okay? They had the language. It could be either English or other languages. Like, for example, I know Lama Nadel Ola, that he was in Germany. So he started to spread the teaching in Germany. And we as Westerners started to receive these teachings, but those teachings were already, I will say, commute with a Western culture. And all of a sudden, the teachings that were given back then by the Tibetan lamas was different from the teachings that students received from the Westerners lamas. But was it really different? From the teaching point of view, I think that the first time that I really understood that the difference is not in the Dharma, but the difference is about the languages or the words that we're using, because the culture is so different. So if you are a student of Lama Lina, I'm sure that you already have heard and learned from her the 3 words of Gerab Dorje. On her website, there are recordings of her translating into English Lama Wangdur teachings, the 3 words of Gerab Dorje. And there are recordings of her teachings, the 3 words of Gerab Dorje, without translating Lama Wangdur, like she gives the teachings. And one time when I was listening to those 2 teachings, because I had to translate it in writing for myself, so I realized that something very interesting is happening because the teaching is the same. I mean, the scripture of the 3 words of Gerab Dorje is the same. Lama Lina spoke in English at the first teachings when Lama Wangdur were teaching it, and when she speaks about it to her students. So what is the difference? It's about the culture. And I think that was the first time I remember asking Lama Lina about that, and she said, giving examples or metaphors like what is right in the Tibetan culture doesn't work for the Westerners. I mean, it doesn't work there. So I had to come up with other metaphors that will reach the place in the heart or the mind of my students, which are Westerners. And she always says, when I go to Tsopema and I teach the Tibetan there, because I don't know if you know, but she has Tibetan students in the caves, yogis and yoginis and nuns and monks and all of that. So she she goes back to the cultural metaphors or teachings or the way she teach, which is totally different than the way she teach in the West. So is it true that the teaching is different? The Dharma is not different, but the method and the metaphors and the way we are receiving the teachings is totally different. So all of a sudden, we have now, I think it's the third generation in the West. We had the first generation in the West, which were those Lama that were escaped from Tibet, or practitioners that were escaped from Tibet and started to teach in the West. Then we had their students like Lama Lina that were nominated as lamas or drupons or lupons or all kind of nominations, because I guess that you already know that there is a difference between those titles that are given. And all of a sudden, we have their students who are teaching. And I guess not for a long time from now, we'll have others. You will be the lamas or the lupons or the drupons or whatever it will be, the way that those teachers will think that you are entitled to teach these teachings. So what is the difference between the lamas that were teaching back then in the 60s, 1960 to 1970, and those who are teaching now, we are about, I don't know, 70 years or 60 years afterwards? I'm not the one to tell you what is the difference. I think that my investigation with that was to learn the history, to study the culture, the Tibetan culture. Somebody asked me why to study the Tibetan culture. Because if I want to understand those books that I'm reading that have the scriptures, okay, I read Tibetan, but I'm not reading it as fluent, so I'm still studying in English, okay? So what is the difference? When I read English, but this is a translation of a Tibetan teacher, it's totally different teachings than somebody else. And I was thinking to myself when Lama Lina asked me to teach those classes, I said, I want to give examples from our daily lives. And some of you knows I'm a psychotherapist. So my life is in the clinic. I'm also a mother. I'm also a wife. I'm also a grandmother. So having said that, my life is different from a life, for example, of a nun, right? Or somebody that was brought up in Tibet, or even somebody who were brought up in India. It's totally different. So it's a fine line, because if I do want to give something in as an example, I just want to make sure that everybody understand that this is my example, okay? When we bring something from the scriptures, it will be from the scriptures, okay? How it was said and written in the scriptures. But I hope that I will be able to open it up to you, that you will be able to absorb that in the way that it fits your culture. Most of us, I think, I don't see any monks or nuns here. Maybe I'm not sure. Maybe some of you do. I mean, have a vow, monk or nuns vow, but I don't see monks or nuns here. And I think this is something which is very important, as a householders or people who are struggling with the practice, being a householder or family or fathers or mothers or having children, or even something that has to do with holding a job. So How do we practice the Tantra? So I want to start, so this is the history. I don't want to go into too much details in the histories. For me, the history has nothing to do with, only the dates and, the invasion here and the geography there. This is very nice, but you can read it elsewhere. What I want, I'm just trying to make sure that what we are receiving from this, trying to understand the origins of Tantra, is that there is no right or wrong with people who are teaching in the West, although their methods of teachings are different. Because otherwise, especially as Tantrika, you're going to break the first vow, as you know, not to criticize your teacher. And you don't want to do that. All of you that were participating in my first class of Tantric vows knows this is something you don't want to do, okay? But you will have different teachers. You will have different teachers, and you will have different methods, and you will have different way of practicing the same Tantra. Why is that? We're talking here about Tantra. We are talking about the Vajrayana world. We are talking about the Tantrayana world. Why there is a difference? If I have a deity, let's say, I don't know, I'll go to the Kriya Tantra, for example, White Tara. If White Tara is a deity that I'm practicing, and my point of view is different in the culture understanding, I will practice it different from somebody else who is practicing that from a different culture point of view. I'll give you an example. I think that has to do with somebody, I think Tara, I'm not sure who was asking me last time the question about the archetypes or the deities or the tankas. And I would like to give you an example exactly from this angle, okay? Let's talk about White Tara for a second, okay? So if I'm living in India and I was raised up in the culture of India, okay? I'm an Indian, not Buddhist maybe, but all of a sudden I got very drawn to the Buddhism and I received the initiation of White Tara. The culture I grew up is that there are shrines everywhere, there are temples everywhere, there are sculptures everywhere, there are tankas everywhere, there are rituals. If I go to the Ganges, I'm full with rituals. And if I go to my family in the village, they are full with rituals. So for me, having a shrine or having an altar with a sculpture of White Tara or a tanka of White Tara, it's something that goes without saying. I mean, I don't care about that. But if I was raised, I'll give you an example in my case, okay? If I was raised as a Jewish, we have a vow as a Jewish not to bow down to sculptures or any material things that might be labeled as God. There is a vow in the Jewish tradition for that. So all of a sudden, if I have a shrine and on my shrine there is a sculpture, a religion person from culture from the Jewish tradition will think that I'm doing something which is wrong in my culture. So there are no shrines, there are no tankas, there are no sculptures. And then all of a sudden you have to hide it. I know one of Lama's students, a friend of mine, Lama Lina's students, she's a Muslim. And in a Muslim, they have something very similar to this vow of the Jewish. So she said, I don't know what to do with my family. Because if I put a sculpture or a tanka or a picture of a deity, I mean, they will not accept that. So what should I do? And of course, Lama Lina, as you know her, she's so practical. She said to her, so put it in a closet. And when you practice, open the door and then close it again. It's not open up. But the way she practiced that is totally different from an Indian guy or a woman who lives in India, or even in a different culture, which is not Jewish and Muslims, because if you're a Christian, so you go and you have a picture of Jesus Christ, or all those ornaments that they're practicing there. So you don't feel a shame or something that you have to hide because you practice a different deity other than the Jesus Christ. So you see how different the same practice, the same white Tara practice. I just give you an example about white Tara, but it can be about all tantric archetypes. Now, let's say that we go even further from that, okay? Because white Tara is so nice. Everybody loves her. You know, she's smiling. And we already understood about it. What about Vajrakilaya? Or Yamantaka? Or Vajrayogini, for God's sake. You know, she's naked. She's not just naked. She's naked, not only upstairs, also downstairs. You see everything. So what is it? Playboy here? I had those reactions, you know, what's going on here? So what happens if you have a family and you have, I don't know, teenagers at your house, and all of a sudden there is a tanka of Vajrayogini? What your children are thinking about you if you are a male or a female, and you have this magnificent, beautiful archetype Vajrayogini, naked Vajrayogini. And you have this 12, 13 boy, you know, he's shining and he's picking up, you know. I mean, now they don't need to pick up because they have everything online, but they used to have, you know, sneaking the Playboy from their parents or their friends and going around with that. But what is it? Is it? It's an archetype. But, and what would I do with Vajrakilaya? I'll give you just, I don't know if many of you knows Vajrakilaya, but I'll give it to you because it's on my board here. What is that? It's a monster who is hugging a monster lady. Can you see that? It's a monster who has 3 heads, 9 eyes, 4 legs, wings, and he's hugging a lady monster. I don't have here the Yamantaka Tanka, but if I'll bring it to you, so he has 16 legs, 32 hands, 9 heads. How do I practice that? What is this? And I'm talking only about an external picture, an external archetype that something comes up. So people are getting drawn into that. But if somebody sees this picture, he said, what are you doing? Are you practicing shamanic or paganic aspect of this monster? I'm sure that some of you have been, some of your friends or family were reacting to you in this manner, you know, here and there. So it's funny because if you practice Tantra, no matter what kind of deity do you practice, you know that the archetype is something which is totally different from what we think. So back then, when the lamas came from Tibet and came to the West and started to give teachings, and then they realized about the cultures of the people here in the West, they put a very strong lines to hidden the tantric teachings, not because it was hidden in Tibet. In Tibet, everything was open. your uncle, your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, everybody practiced this. But they were very concerned about how the Westerners will receive those teachings. And what happens now? It's only one generation, okay, from those lamas that came. Their students now are teaching like our beloved Lama, Lama Lina. There are teachings everywhere. And there are still some teachers who are keeping the vows, or not the vows, the teaching, the tantric teachings secret. And there are other teachers like one of my heart teachers like Gorchen Rinpoche or Drupal Rinchen Rinpoche, which are Tibetan, by the way. They think they don't need to hide that. Everything is open. They say, if something will be kept secret, it's not because we will keep it secret. It's because the person that will be in touch or will find these teachings on the internet will not have any interest with them. Or if he has an interest in that, after a while, he will just, lose interest and will move on to something else. So what keeps the secret from Tantra? The Tantrayana, which is supposed to be very secret, is actually self-secret. But that's not the way it was brought up from let's say, on the 70s, 1970 or something like that. And now you need to understand, those Tibetan Lama that came to the West and find out about our Westerners' mind, they had to do something to protect our mind. It's not because they just wanted to keep something from themselves, because they're Buddhists. So they want to bring everybody to enlightenment. So it was very interesting to see from a cultural point of view how we work and how things are evolving, okay? I just asked one of my friends, they were in Nepal, and I asked them to bring me a specific tanka. I love those images, okay? But myself, I'm an artist. I'm sculpturing. I used to paint. I'm not painting anymore, but I used to, and I love art. And for me, it's not just a tool of practicing. Tanka or sculpture is a tool of practicing. For me, it's not just tool of practicing. I love to surround myself with that. And when you go to Nepal or you go to India, I never been in Tibet, but I guess it's also, if there are still some places, some temples in Tibet, you get into a temple, everywhere you find tankas. For me, it's something that opens my heart, open my eyes, It's not different than going into some kind of museum, but the resonance that I have with that is totally different because it's something that opens my mind. So I want to ask you, how is it with you? How do you react to those archetypes that you see? When you look at Vajrakilaya, what the reaction that you have? When you look at White Tara, what is the reaction that you have? Have you stopped thinking about it? Just, do some introspective inside of you and see to whom and to what I'm drawn. What is happening to my body? What is happening to my heart when I see those archetypes? Because Tantra is all about the subconscious. It's working subconsciously. Yes, we will study a lot of things that has to do with the different deities. Yes, we will study a lot of things that has to do with different tools in Tantra. But on a personal level, it's the resonance that you have with the deity. The resonance that you have with all the symbols that has to do with this specific archetype. White Tara, the reason why she is white, and the reason why Vajrayogini is red, and the reason why Vajrakilaya is dark blackish blue is because it has a different effect on our subconsciousness. And it brings up different energy. When it brings up the different energy, we know that we are affected by this energy. So it brings us to the motivation. Again, we started to talk about it last week. What is the motivation? Why do we practice Tantra? If I'll go to what Lama Lina is saying about what is the motivation about practicing Tantra, it always has to do with the understanding that we want to change our mental or conscious patterns. That's the reason why we do that. And there are different motivation for that. Yeah, Richard, I see that you raised your hand. There was somebody else who raised their hand and they took it down. Natalia, was it you? Yes, I think it was you. So I'll come back to you in a few minutes. What does it mean to change our patterns, our behaviors patterns, or mental patterns? Why do we have to change them? Why do we want to change them? So let's go back to the fourth noble truth. The Buddha, when he became a Buddha, he understood four things, actually. That's why they call four noble truths, okay? He understood that there is suffering, and we all aware to the suffering. There are 3 kinds of suffering, there are 6 kinds of suffering, there are 16 kinds of sufferings. I'm not going to get into it, but the main thing that we know that the suffering of suffering is that if you're sick or if you want something and you do not get it, and if you don't want something and you do get it, you suffer. I don't think that I need to explain to anybody what is suffering. Everybody knows what is suffering, right? So when he spoke about that, everybody was drawn. I think that he was the best a marketing person on earth, and also the best psychologist on earth, because he was just, everybody was drawn to his teaching because he said, there is a suffering. And he explained that a little bit in what I'm saying here now. And everybody said, oh, yes, I feel the same. I'm suffering. And then he said, oh, there are reasons to you that you suffer, which is the second noble truth, right? There are reasons. You want to know why you're suffering? I'll teach you why you are suffering. And then he said, I have good news. I told you he was a very good marketing person. I have good news for you guys. The third noble truth is you can stop this suffering. There is an end to this suffering. And then he said, you want to know how? I'll tell you how. And this is the fourth noble truth. There is a way to stop the suffering. But it doesn't work to everybody. So each one will have those tools that will help them for those 4 noble truths. Created motivation within people to start practicing the Dharma, either the Hinayana or the Mahayana or the Vajrayana, according to their level, okay, what they could capture. But he gave us tools, and those tools were amazing. You know that he gave 84,000 tools? 84,000 tools, different tools. Just imagine to yourself if you're bringing a plumber to your house and he has a toolbox, and he has 84 tools in his box, and he's saying, okay, what do you need? I'll give you that, and I'll give you that. And we have this amazing opportunity. I don't know how many lamas you know, but not many lamas are sitting 2 or 3 times a week with their students and having the opportunity that the student can ask them the question like Lama Lina does. And she gives everybody the tool that he needs not a tool. And she always says, this is what I give to you or to this person. This is not to everybody here in this room, because she sees which one needs what. So actually, if we are looking at the motivation of why practicing Tantra, is to change something. This is the third novel truth, right? I want to stop the suffering. So I'm going to the fourth novel truth. Bring it on. Bring me something. Give me something that will stop this suffering. I can't suffer anymore. And that's the main motivation, which is very selfish, by the way. And it's okay. You know what the Dalai Lama always says when people are asking him about, why to give something, when he teaches about karma, and he said, oh, but if I'll give something because I want to receive something, so this is very selfish. And he said, just imagine to yourself the world, if everybody gives everything and they receive everything. So this is a selfishness, enlightenment. So everybody will be enlightened, and we are all selfish, and we are all going to be very happy, and we'll get whatever we want. So although the focus is that we want to stop the suffering, we hop on the path and we start doing something in order to diminish or to stop our suffering. And guess what? All of a sudden, on the Mahayana path, on the Vajrayana path, I'm not staying there. I'm trying to help everybody to be happy. So that's why I wanted to start with the origins, with the history of the Tantra, because it's so important to understand why we will be practicing that. And next week, we're going to dive into the different Tantras. Now, I'm not talking about different archetypes, different type of Tantras, and why we practice each one of them, and why I'm being drawn to this Tantra and not to this one. It has nothing to do with, the competition. This one is higher than this one, or this one is lower than this one, although this is the language that we do. It's only because that's what fits me. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, something else will fit me. Maybe tomorrow I will be able to understand a different path that I'm not able to understand it now. Okay, so we'll open up now for questions. Richard, you're first.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got a quick couple of questions about the Vajrayogini mantra. Now, you said that the commitment is 100,000 manis, right?
That's the request of Drupal Rinchen Rinpoche. It's
right.
not my request or anybody else's request. Every teacher has their own request for the Samaya. Okay, so I just want to make sure that we are all in pace. One of my heart teachers, those of you who received the empowerment from him, you knew in advance that they need to do 100,000 mantras of Vajrayogini in their lifetime, hopefully within a year. That's what he said.
Right. Now, the mantra, I find, looking at the sadhana, and it says mantra recitation, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's like 6 lines on it, right? But I noticed when they were doing the practice in Austin, they kept repeating the last 2 lines.
The only last 2 lines, yeah. You need to do only the last 2 lines. The one that they were singing.
Right, I got you. Okay.
This is the mantra. This is Vajrayogini mantra.
Right.
It's the name of this mantra is the 3 Ohms, because it starts with Om Om.
Right. Right.
And the name of the tantra, the mantra is 3 Ohms, and that's the one that you're obliged to. Once you have received the empowerment from Drupal Rinchen Rinpoche, this is the Samaya that you need to keep.
Right. So if I find between now and when I finish the 100,000, if I find another practice that I think speaks to me more, I can't do it until I finish the 100,000.
You can do that because Lama Lina always says that you can do 3 practices at the same time. But
you won't have to do that.
but I want to say something about that, okay? The reason why teachers like Drupal Rinchen Rinpoche is giving samayas that has to do with practice, because many of my lamas, even Tibetan lamas, do not give that, is not because he wants you to do the 100,000 mantras. Because when you start to do the mantras and you're doing the sadhana and you start to studying the teachings about the sadhana and the practice, all of a sudden something else happens. And remember, I spoke just a few minutes ago about the motivation. We want to change our patterns. We want to change our mental patterns in order to be happier and to be benefit to the world. So just saying the mantra will not do much, but at least if it will give you some interest in order to dive into the practice, that's the great samaya. Okay. So I hope, yeah. I spoke with Lamalina just the other day, and I said to her that maybe after people that were receiving the Vajrayogini initiation empowerment from Drupal Rinpoche, we might do also a practice group that I will lead, and I will give a small teaching each time before the practice. Okay, so we can do the practice on one hand, and we'll get some teaching. Okay, so I hope that you will be drawn to the practice, not just, okay, I'll have to do 100,000 mantras, this is getting not, okay. Okay, and this is the only question? You said you had two questions.
No, that's it.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
All right. Natalia, you want to ask something?
Yeah, thanks so much, Dorit. It's so interesting to listen to you always. So my two questions are super related to each other. First question has to do with the origins and how the teachings have been adapted to Westerners, but didn't that also happen when they came to Tibet from India? And, is there any documentation of how that process happened? And then the second one that's also very related has to do with the archetype. How it works in our minds, because I've heard Lama Lina say, for example, that Sarasvati is a version of Tara, and she looks so different from the Tibetan Tankas. What if in our own self generation, it's happened to me in dream time sometimes, for example, that my dream time Chenrezig looks different to my wake time Chenrezig. Is it possible that that all these adaptations just work differently for everybody? I mean, should we be very rigid about how things should look?
Yeah. So you had two questions. Each one of them is a totally different whole teachings, and I try to answer you in a very brief manner. So with regard to the history, there is a debate about who brought Buddhism to Tibet, because, for example, Guru Rinpoche, he was, in Tsopema, there is a statue there, and he was with Mandarava and with Yeshe Sogyal, and he was in India. And some people saying that Guru Rinpoche brought Buddhism to Tibet. I don't want to get into this close history, but in between the 6th or the 7th century, Buddhism, after the Muslim invasion to India, Buddhism came to Tibet. Maybe not to everywhere in Tibet, maybe some section, maybe more close. But definitely we know that in the 10th century, between the 10th and the 11th century, Lord Atisha was invited from India, because Buddhism was again in India, from India to Tibet, and he brought the Buddhism to Tibet that after about, I would say, 200 years or so, it was evolved as what we know as the Enigma, which were the first school that started at the 6th and the 7th and the 8th century. The Enigma and the Kagyu, there are the earlier schools, and then the Sakya is afterwards. And then what happened is that on the 14th century, actually it was 1357, that's the time that Tsongkhapa was brought or edited all the teachings from the Kagyu and the Nyingma and the Sakya into something which was much more, let's say, elaborated, and then it became the Gelug tradition, okay? There was no Gelug tradition before Tsongkhapa, okay? There were the Nyingma, the Kagyu, and the Sakya. And of course, the bond that were there before, some kind of different Buddhism, but still intact. So this, from history point of view, that's the evolution of the history in Tibet for the Buddhism, okay? Again, Bon, but much, much earlier, before Guru Rinpoche brought the Buddhism into Tibet, and then, the Lord Atisha at the 10th, or in between the 10th and the 11th century. So if you look at it now, you see that we are actually, I don't know, like about 1,500 years after Lord Atisha brought Buddhism into Tibet. Many things are being evolved in Tibet with regard to Buddhism. For example, there were no written language in Tibet. So I don't know if you know, but Lord Atisha and created some kind of community that were creating the written Tibetan language, because there were no written Tibetan, no alphabet there. So what he did, that they started to translate all the Indian Pali canon into Tibetan. In order to do that, they needed a lot of people. And then that's why we see in many of the lineages, we see that this and this, the translator, okay, translator in Tibetan called Lotsawa. So you see this Lotsawa and this Lotsawa and this Lotsawa, because you need to know what you need to be a practitioner in order to translate in the right manner. Okay, and that's for the first question. About the second question, sure. I mean, if I'm generating myself as Vajrayogini, do I look like Vajrayogini in the Tanka? I wish I would, but I'm not. Okay. So, of course, there are different archetypes that comes up from the subconsciousness. I think we'll talk about it much more in the module that has to do with the psychology of Tantra, because this question goes exactly to the psychology of Tantra. How we see ourselves, or how we see the deity, regardless of what is happening in the Tanka. Okay, remember, the Tanka has symbols that are affecting our mind and our subconsciousness. And then what's happened is that we are transforming, something is changing within us. Okay, so yes, we'll talk about it more. But yes, you can see yourself as Chan Ruzik in a totally different manner. When I'm practicing Yamantaka or Vajrakilaya or any of those, let's say male, okay, although we know that they have both energy, but male tantras, last time I looked, nothing happened in between my legs that has to do with the male thing. Still, I'm practicing male tantras, okay? Okay, Corey, good to see you. Last time your camera didn't work. How are you?
Yeah, no, it is. Good to see you too. So there's something that you said that got me a little worried. And it's about criticizing the teacher. And I'm a very rebellious person. And I often question the teacher, and not in a disrespectful way, but as a way, hey, I disagree
Yo
with
no sé
this.
por
This is
qué
why.
el Uber aparece por allá lejos.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry. And I'll often debate the lamas, and I enjoy debating, and I do it often in a very respectful way. But there's some things where I think I went a little bit too far with it. Like I wouldn't say who the teacher is, but there's a certain high lama who very much poked my pride. last summer, and I was saying things like, "Oh, I'm a little disappointed in him," and this and that. And really, it was just coming from my own pride, and he was showing my own issues with my pride. Now, in retrospect, I see that. Um, I guess my question is, what's the fine line between questioning, criticizing, and also the discrepancy? I'm trying to articulate this in the most best way possible, but like the discrepancy between the argument against blind faith and um not being able to criticize the teacher, because I see that as somewhat of as a discrepancy. And what
So
is that
first, yeah.
dividing line?
So
Yeah.
first of all, from what you're saying, I hear that you found yourself doing something that you now look back and say, I just crossed the line about something, whatever you said, right?
Yeah.
What you said now, it's that you are regretting about that. The first
Yeah.
thing that
What?
you regret about what you said or
Mm,
what you, right? So the first thing that we know about cleaning karma, that a regret has to be in place. So
mm,
when you are regretting, this is the first sign that you're realizing that something that you did was wrong. It has to
mm.
do either with criticizing a teacher or any other dharma, karma thing that you did, right? So be glad that you regret, first of all. Good for you. The second thing is, yeah, the second thing is that if you recognize, by the way, that when you are debating a teacher with a teacher or about a teacher, and you're criticizing them while you're doing that, and you see that it has to do with your pride, so that was the best teacher for you, because
Mm,
the situation pointed out for you to see your pride.
mm.
So I guess that if I had a teacher that is poking me about some kind of a mental issue that I had like a pride, and he keeps doing that, I will go and kiss them eventually. Not at that moment, not at the moment they're poking me, because it's hard. But in the
Yeah.
end of the day, if they're showing me something that is creating a lot of suffering to me, because pride creates a lot of suffering.
Oh,
I
for
and
me, it's a
I
huge
need to
one.
work, yeah, and I need to work with that. So they are the best teacher ever, ever. I don't like it, but I will stay with them. I will hold to them, because
Yeah.
the good teacher is not necessarily a nice teacher. It's the one who shows you where you have to look in order to change your patterns. Because as I said
Yeah.
before, this is the main motivation to diminish our suffering, only by being able to change our mental patterns. There's no other
Yeah.
way that we can diminish our suffering. So thank you for the question. And I hope that now you can go and do some, I don't know, a mala for Vajrasattva after you have the regret, because if you wouldn't have the regret, Vajrasattva won't help you. But now that
Yeah.
you regret, and I hope that you're going to look at this teacher from a different angle. I hope so.
Totally, totally. And I do now, and I'll see him in a couple months, and I will thank him.
You will
And
thank him. Give him a nice kata. Bring him a nice offering. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. It can be, I don't know, a chocolate or something. And to
yeah,
thank him for
yogurt.
that. Yeah, thank him for
Yeah.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, Drew, now you. And you're the last one because we're just passing our time. Yes, Drew.
Okay. Yeah, so what kind of comes up for me when I see some of these like fierce forms like Vajrakalaya or Yamataka is that would be so perfectly at home on like a heavy metal album cover. And what's interesting about the heavy metal scene is that the people are all really, really kind, because the music has this kind of quality of like catharsis to it. So I'm curious about, or I guess my question is, what is the role of emotional catharsis in Tantra, and how does that relate to the archetypes?
Catharsis. First of all, good for you that you have a catharsis when you see or hear those images, because I wish we all do. Most of us don't. I mean, a strong reaction like catharsis is a very, very strong reaction and shows a lot of connection from previous life to this specific deity or archetype. The catharsis, from a tantric point of view, I want to distinguish because in the Dzogchen it's different, and some of you are participating in Lama Lina's Dzogchen. I want to make sure that we are doing the distinguishing. The catharsis from tantric point of view is a way that our subconsciousness is reacting to something that's transformed, something is changed. We still need to control that. We need to know how to work with that because, it's not just, some kind of trip or something. From Dzogchen point of view, it's a nyam. In Tantra, we work a lot with nyams, okay? But from Dzogchen point of view, it's a nyam. It started and it will fade away. And if it started, it has an end. And we do not want to stay there. In Tantra, we do want to stay in those nyams until it has some kind of sealing in our mind. It has to seal our mind in order to make the transformation that has to do with Tantra. It's totally different in Dzogchen. I hope I answered your question. I think we'll dive more in those kind of reactions when we'll get into the psychology of Tantra. We'll dive there. Believe me, this is my interest. Lama Lina says always, her interest is Dharma. My interest is the Buddhist psychology and psychology in Tantra, how it works. I love to dive deep into it. Okay, I hope you would too. Okay, so just let's go and do some dedication. Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure being with you all this time. Thank you. Thank you. Gewadi Nyurdudan Chechi Salam Ngopasho. May all beings stop their suffering, be happy, and find their way, their path to liberation. We are all in it together. So if we will find our way to liberation, we will be able to free them all. Bye, guys. See you next week.